Welcome to Siliconsciousness, the DSR Network podcast focusing on the artificial intelligence revolution, politics, and policy.
This podcast is underwritten in part by the U.S. Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Its editorial content is completely independent, and the views expressed are exclusively those of participating experts. It is presented live, without editing. For further information about the UAE's efforts in the areas of artificial intelligence and technology, go to the website of the embassy at www.uae-embassy.org and search for UAE-US Tech Cooperation. We thank them for their support. We thank everybody who's supporting this podcast for their support, and we look forward to it developing and growing over time because the issue is so important. Hello and welcome to Siliconsciousness. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host every week, trying to bring us views and perspectives from leading experts on important areas that have to do with AI and everything that's swirling around with AI. Maybe not Elon Musk's Grok. Maybe we'll skip Mecha Hitler this week, but maybe we won't. Who knows? We've got a great guest with us who's joined us before. Camille Stewart Gloster is the CEO of CAS Strategies, LLC, and the former Deputy National Cyber Director for Technology and Ecosystem Security for the White House. How are you doing, Camille?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, it's the summer, the world is falling apart around our ears, but, at least the weather's better. So
The weather is better, except it's raining way too much.
yeah, I totally agree with you. We should talk about that. There are people in Congress talking about that. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lee Zeldin, the head of EPA, have both made very strong statements this week about chemtrails and that all our weather has to do with people trying to manipulate the environment. Seriously, I really feel like MAGA is a movement designed to make stupid people feel less stupid. It's like,
I believe that.
Right? They were saying like, yeah, I have this stupid idea. And then they say, well, something, that idea is not so stupid.
We're going to embrace it and champion it so you feel good about yourself.
Right. The head of the EPA is talking about chemtrails. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. I saw an article that you wrote. We'd wanted to have you back for a while, but I saw an article that you wrote for Tech Policy Press, which is called What AI Policy Can Learn from Cyber, Designed for Threats, Not in Spite of Them. And I thought it was terrific. In fact, the opening line cuts directly to something that I think is at the center of the news right now, where you say, if you want to understand why regulatory guardrails can supercharge, not stifle technological innovation, don't look to theory, look to cyber security. So maybe we can just start from there and talk a little bit about why you wrote it now.
Yeah, there seems to be this misperception in Congress or in Washington in general, especially on the Republican side, that any kind of guardrails are limiting and stifling innovation. But that has not been proven to be true. We also need to give our engineers more credit. They innovate in spite of design constraints all the time. And so in thinking about that, I partnered with Afua Bruce, who is a brilliant engineer who works in the public space. And we started talking about this phenomenon of design constraints. And I was like, cybersecurity is the example. It is a great example that I think everyone can connect to, no matter your depth of understanding. And we decided to put that to paper. And Zero trust architecture, I think, is actually one of the best illustrations. We've all seen this move from once you're inside the network, you're trusted, to a requirement for stringent identity verification of the device and the person. and that continuous monitoring that goes along with zero trust architecture. We trust no one. We want to make sure that you are who you say you are, that you and this device are supposed to have access to the information you have access to, or the networks you have access to. And that was an innovation that came about because everyone started working from home, and we had such distributed, from a physical sense, but also from a technological sense, organizations that we had to protect. And so as cybersecurity practitioners started to think about the best way to do that, it became very clear that you couldn't trust every device, every person, every time, and that you had to think about your perimeter very differently, or the edge of your network very differently. That is a innovation that makes us much more secure, that came about because of the constraints.
And created new businesses, right? Created, I mean, innovation doesn't just come from letting guys sit alone in a room, do whatever they want. In fact, I think the cybersecurity example is a great example, but here's another example. Every other industry in the history of the world.
Thank you. Seatbelts. I mean, there was a whole lobby that was like, seatbelts are not actually something that we need to require, which I can never understand why you would not want to keep people more safe in something moving so quickly. But there was a lobby against seatbelts and against requiring seatbelts, until we figured out that, like, maybe that is something we need to advance. And they made the case, and seatbelts were an innovation that were developed, and we've figured out how cars can still serve us very well, even with this strap across our chest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But, cleaner water, safer airplanes, safer conditions for miners, safer factory conditions. Every single one of those regulatory developments led to not just, better outcomes for those who are supposed to be made safer, but new businesses, new industries, growth. It's just such a misapprehension, and I just I wonder how you think the struggle in this regard is going, because we do have an administration in Washington that seems to, it's got a lot of folks close to the AI world, donating or involved with it one way or another. And it does seem that their policy is the less regulation, the better. And that went to a certain extreme, and you mentioned it in your article, with the proposal to put a ban on state and local regulation in the reconciliation bill that they put through. But that got killed, I
Yeah,
think.
which I'm very grateful. I mean, even that idea is insane to me. The idea of trying to stop a patchwork of legislation by stopping states from being able to advocate for their citizens is the wrong course of action. It's actually the specter of states passing regulation that will push Congress to take some action, if they are to ever take some action. So we kind of need it to do that. Also, how can you put forward a moratorium without putting forward an actual federal proposal on how you regulate AI? Leaves us in a place where people are not protected. I mean, these technologies are supposed to be designed to protect people, to serve people, to make life more convenient and better. But you've got to balance the scale on, great innovation and new ideas with some of the other things that we hold dear, right? Protecting our children, keeping us secure, protecting us on a national security level, all of these things that we're not contemplating if we just let free reign happen, because then, some companies will value those values, some will not. To me, it is a business imperative, and organizations that have a longer term view will embrace protecting people and centering their needs. But that's not always how the market works. The market is incentivizing right now moving fast. And in that kind of a world, government is supposed to step in and protect citizens, guide the market, shift the incentives.
Well, I mean, I think we often lose sight of the fact that companies are allowed to exist. They're given papers by the government to serve society. That society is not supposed to serve the companies. And particularly with something like AI, that's important because as important as cybersecurity is and has been, it's a vertical.
Yeah.
AI is horizontal. The AI will be in everything, touch everything. You're already seeing it. It's in your glasses, it's in your phone, it's in your apps, it's everywhere. And we're in the early days of this yet. And so there are a whole host of issues that arise. There are, AI in medical diagnostics or in medical research has a bunch of regulatory issues. AI in creative areas has a whole bunch of issues having to do with copyright. AI in cyber, we haven't had the explosion of bots doing all the cyber and rewriting code in real time that we're gonna have, right?
Yes. I mean, we have regulatory frameworks that will help. That is one good thing, right? In each sector, we've got rules about, what harm shouldn't come in the financial sector and the health sector. But if you are doing AI well, you are reimagining how things work. You are re-architecting systems and processes and innovating in even how you deliver solutions to your customers. You shouldn't just be bolting AI on. And in that world, to your point, we need to reimagine, rethink, reevaluate. Maybe not all of them need to change, but the regulatory landscape around the services and the critical infrastructure that we need for our society to be healthy and functioning. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a proponent of heavy regulation by any stretch. I think light touch is the right way to go. But that what we're hearing is no touch, not light touch. I think that we should be intentional and thoughtful. And the great thing about our policy process when it's working is that it's iterative. When we learn that something doesn't achieve the desired end, we have the opportunity to reframe and rewrite and propose new legislation that can change that. And so if we are in a society that has a functioning legislative apparatus, we would be in a good place to be responsive should we find out that something is actually stifling innovation. But that has not been shown to be true yet. We've passed a number of legislation, curtailing certain behaviors in the cyber arena, right? You've seen the financial sector has a lot of cybersecurity related regulation. You've seen a number of industries like healthcare, like you mentioned, and they're still innovating. We're still getting good products out of those spaces.
Well, also, there is a kind of uh, a new set of problems created if the federal government says we're out of this business, right? Because then states will get into this business and cities will get into this business and other countries will get into this business. And frankly, I used to be a senior trade official in the US government, and our job when this was in the 90s when I was doing this, was that the world was a regulatory mess and you couldn't get to scale with anything. Companies couldn't plan properly if there were hundreds of different regulatory regimes. And so you wanted to harmonize it, you wanted to coordinate it. If our government opts out, yes, others are going to opt in. And I see, I talk a little bit about it because you mentioned the regulatory patchwork quilt in the article, but we're already seeing California is going to do this with AI and other states are going to do that with AI. And I think if you're a company and you see that, you're like, uh-oh,
Yes.
I can't go to a VC and say, invest in me, because the VC is going to go, well, I don't know how scalable this will be, because they're going to be 15 different regimes.
Yes. And basically you're beholden to whichever one is the most restrictive. Not to mention, to your point about on a global stage, we're seeing more and more countries, regions, blocks. BRICS just announced they have an entire proposal on AI and data protection. I mean, you are going to see this race to be at the forefront of regulation in the absence of the US setting a standard, which is going to pull companies at the seams. But to be frank, most companies are asking for some kind of guidance and boundaries. I don't think that they feel like Congress is ready to do it, but I know that they want the guardrails. They've said that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think the lesson of history is that regulations will come, whether you want them or not. And so the question is, how do you want to manage that? And, I've lived in Washington for the past 30 years. And so I'm really reluctant to put the word smart in front of anything because, it's just like a cheap policy formulation. But maybe with a small s and not trying to coin a phrase. You need smart regulation, not no regulation, right? So I think this is a real challenge. Let me switch gears a little bit here, because I'm also interested in the cyber issues that you immersed yourself in for so much of your career, because this administration seems to have dismantled a lot of our cyber defense structure at precisely an inflection point, AI powered cyber, that you would think is the wrong inflection point. And I was just wondering if you might want to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tension between the two topics, right? How do you say states should not legislate on AI, but also push all of the cybersecurity to states and local governments to take on? Because that's essentially what's happening. They are having to fill the gap because a lot of the requirements have become either voluntary or are not being spurred or pushed forward by federal procurement power or the other mechanisms that are in the federal toolkit. A lot of things like quantum cryptography has become optional for agencies to put into place. That is a huge opportunity for an adversary to wage an attack in the world of quantum computing and AI. When those two meet and they've got access to this data and it's got not quantum resistant cryptography, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the American people? So we put
Yeah, and just to simplify that for people, essentially what you're talking about is the ability to have cyber attacks that solve defenses in real time, right?
yes. Well, that and like we've all seen that cryptography, encryption is protecting our data, whether in transit and rest, that kind of thing. The cryptography of today is not going to stand up to the supercomputers that are coming, the quantum supercomputers. So we did a lot of work in the federal government to come up with encryption that was resistant to that kind of supercomputer focused attack. That was a requirement to implement. It is no longer a requirement to implement. This is one example of some of the changes that are happening. Not that they've gotten rid of the work, but they've just rolled back some of the requirements to implement to further protect us. And so this move to shift a lot of things to voluntary rather than required, this move away from using federal procurement to shift industries into better behavior. That's a big lever that the federal government has. So if they say all of our cloud providers need to do X, all of our software providers need to do Y, the federal purchasing power, the size of these agencies is grand, it's enormous. That means that the entire market shifts if you want to enter into the federal market. And while you're doing for that, you might as well do it for the businesses you serve, the small companies you serve, that kind of thing. Those requirements have been removed in large part. And so these shifts are going to have far reaching impacts. You hope that things already in flight will continue, that companies will step up and anticipate that maybe the shift back in 3.5 years or so. But without the requirements, we're very much left to trusting that companies and individuals are advocating for more secure practices. And that has shown itself to not be the case in large part because it's more
Yeah.
expensive.
Well, and something else has happened. 4 years ago, the Biden administration, in its focus on AI policy, was primarily focused on keeping the U.S. ahead of China. And a lot of the work that was, we're not going to sell this technology to China. We're not going to sell that. We've got the secret sauce and we don't want to let them get it. At the time, I said I thought it was a mistake, and I think it's a mistake in retrospect because China's ahead of us in a lot of stuff, and you can't put the genie back. When we said they couldn't get, this is sort of goes to your first point. When we said, "Oh, we're not going to give you that technology," they said, "Okay, well, we'll make it ourselves." Right? They innovated around the barrier. And so with AI, as with cyber, for a whole host of reasons, which maybe you would like to talk to, we are losing our edge here in the United States.
Yeah. And some of the other policy decisions that we're making or not making are going to make that worse. For example, us not investing in digital skills to upskill not only our students, but every American citizen to be able to adopt this technology and to also have the skills necessary to evolve as the digital landscape evolves. So right now it's generative AI, it'll be agentic, it'll continue to evolve. We need the skill sets as a population to be able to meet that moment. We're not doing that. Our workforce and labor market are changing. Government is not stepping in to fill the gap in how companies are hiring, what entry level talent looks like, what the pipelines are. There's a lot of work to be done that is happening in other places like China, like the UAE, where they're making investments in their people, where they're making investments in their regulatory environment beyond things that look specifically for AI to make sure that they are fit for purpose and ready to continue to innovate and ready to meet the moment. We need to invest in workforce policies. We need to invest in thinking about our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure. There are a number of implications that will keep us behind. And we're also losing a lot of talent. We are losing a lot of our scientists, a lot of our AI engineers who are moving abroad. I don't know if you saw, but the first scientific refugee showed up in France recently from the US. And so we are creating an environment that actually undercuts the very goals that we say that we have, which is to be innovative and to lead on AI innovation.
Certainly, if I were to become a scientific refugee, I would go to France.
I
I
mean,
think
yes.
that would be a good choice. But the reality is that China is capitalizing on that.
Yes.
Canada is capitalizing on it. I saw a story yesterday. Norway, Switzerland, countries in Europe are capitalizing on it. The UAE you mentioned is doing an enormous amount to capitalize on it because you may say, well, I'm really interested in AI, but I can't be bothered with immigration policy. But the immigration policy is AI policy if you're not going to have students come into your schools, right? Similarly, your science research funding policy is your AI policy because it shatters science communities and it destroys pure research.
And much of the innovations that we enjoy start at research institutions or start in government research institutions, and then through the tech transfer process, go into the products we know and love. So without that investment, without NSF and other government agencies pouring money into our research universities and other institutions, we stand to fall behind and quickly.
And there are other areas where we fall behind because there is a debate on regulation of AI going on around the world. And if we are absent from that debate, or we are offering a solution that is just unrealistic, which is no regulation, then people aren't going to listen. And I think we talked about it the last time that you were on here, which is, one of the big things that emerging countries are dealing with is digital sovereignty.
Yes.
Who's controlling the cloud? Who's controlling their data? It has a cyber component to it. It has a privacy component to it. It has a national security component to it. And it involves having rules and regulations and other countries that are willing to step up and say, and just, help them get to a sensible place on that, are going to use that as an advantage ahead of us. The Chinese do. I mean, let's not put a unfair, unnecessary gloss on China, but they do come from a system where the assumption is the government is going to regulate some of this stuff.
Yes.
So
the government has been very strategic in making infrastructure investments, and to your point, providing the support necessary for countries to get what feels like digital sovereignty related to AI. And so in a world where standards bodies, China is showing up heavy, and now the other countries that are there have some tie to or allegiance to China, everything starts to shift.
Yeah, part of that is we lose the edge in a lot of things. We also lose our influence. Huawei, which we spent 3 or 4 years trying to say, get back in your box, they've now come out and they've said, well, our solution isn't the NVIDIA solution, but we can get you to the same place. We can actually get you to processing speeds that are 2 or 3 times faster. It may use more energy, but most of the people in the world are saying, well, shit, I don't want to be left out of the AI revolution. So I'm going to deal with whoever is going to keep me in the game, right?
Yes, which is going to shift the entire world order. There is a shift happening that the US is accelerating by stepping out of the conversation, by deciding not to take regulatory steps forward and help shape the future of AI. It's a gap, and every country is figuring out how they will fill it.
Yeah. And, I think from the point of view of the United States, some of the policies that are currently thought to be helpful to AI are actually not helpful to AI. And just not just now, but down the road. We don't train people. We won't have government officials who are capable of doing this stuff.
Yes, exactly. We won't have senior leaders. We won't have, right now, what we have is a middle tier of professional that is doing the work. But what about that expertise? And what about the entry level pipeline? Gen Z coming out of school right now, they're struggling to find jobs. And that is an environment that creates room for a whole host of things, from radicalization to upset to financial chaos. I mean, we're setting ourselves up by not investing in things like workforce policy, energy policy, and all of the things that wrap around AI for an environment that will become adverse for America.
So right. Not the most cheerful point to end on here in the midst of the summer. But it's always great to talk to you. And I don't want to wait so long to get you back because you're so smart and you've got such great insights. And I encourage everybody to follow Camille, and we will too, and invite her back. But for now, thank you, Camille. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back again with you next week and every week here on Scylla Consciousness with more on the future of AI. And we hope you will join us for that. Until then, bye-bye.